Hey, welcome to a new video. We all know that people of ancient times are very different than they are today. Are you new to this channel? Make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And before we start, also like the video. The nemes is an iconic headpiece worn by pharaohs, popular from the Old Kingdom to the Ptolemaic period. The headgear made of fabric provides a lighter alternative to the heavy crowns often worn by pharaohs. Its clever design offered both comfort and style, covering the head and falling down behind the ears, secured with a knot or braid at the back of the neck. Some variations featured brands of lapis lazuli blue and gold. Additionally, the nemes was secured to the head and adorned with symbolic motifs, such as the cobra and the vulture. This distinctive headwear, typically worn by the elite of Egyptian society, not only held aesthetic appeal, but also symbolized high status within Egypt's strict social hierarchy and provided practical benefits. Shaved heads, a sign of nobility, were protected from the harsh sun, and the nemes also helped maintain hygiene by minimizing the risk of head lice. Baldness was also undesirable for men. Wigs originally used for hygiene and discomfort were made not only from human hair, but also from horsehair. This transition occurred during Egypt's Second Intermediate period. The Greek alphabet was developed around the year 10,000 BC. We all know that the Greek language is ancient, but did you actually know that the original Greek was completely different from the Greek we know today? In fact, it was written from right to left. Scientists discovered this before the classical period, which ran from 500 to 336 BC. Every city in ancient Greece had its own writing system, and most manuscripts found throughout the country during this period were written from right to left. Athens, however, was the first city to standardize its alphabet and make left to right writing the new norm. It did take a while for other cities to follow Athens, but eventually they fully adhered to this standard. The scarab beetle holds a revered place in ancient Egyptian culture and religion, celebrated for its characteristic behavior of rolling balls of dung across the ground to lay its eggs. This was seen as a potent symbol of the cyclical nature of life, death, and rebirth. The scarab was closely associated with the god Khepri, who embodied the emerging sun in the creative process. Artworks often depicted scarabs, which were also incorporated into amulets, with powerful symbolism and protection and prosperity. Additionally, they served a practical role in ancient Egyptian society, often used as seals for important documents. These revered creatures were not limited to the living. Scarab amulets were frequently placed in tombs to safely guide the deceased to the afterlife. Sometimes scarab amulets were placed on the heart during the mummification process, emphasizing their crucial role in the journey to the afterlife. It's common knowledge that in the Middle Ages there were very strict rules for all sorts of things. But did you know that even animals could be considered criminals and could have their own lawyer? If you thought that only today we have all kinds of rules for animals, you're wrong. In the Middle Ages, dogs, cats, and other animals had their own animal court, with animal judges. But could you imagine if an animal was considered a criminal? Because the animal was accused of these sins, it was publicly executed. For many years, courts in medieval Europe tried various animals, from rats to dogs and even pigs. Bread and beer form the staple of the Egyptian diet, sustaining the population in their daily lives. Breads, mainly from emmer wheat, varied in shape from flatbreads reminiscent of pita bread to elongated cone-shaped forms. Notably, Egyptian soldiers stationed in Nubian forts were allowed bread rations, indicated by incised bread-shaped wooden tokens, each representing a period of 10 days. In a society without coins or paper currency, these food rations often served as compensation for laborers and household staff. Ancient Egyptian beer, thick and cloudy, served more as a nutritious source than a purely recreational beverage, likely with a lower alcohol content than modern beers. There's probably not a single living person who doesn't know what the Olympics are. This event was originally dedicated to the supreme god Zeus, and the games took place all over Greece. Just like today, the Olympics were very important, but many Olympic fans actually know nothing about the origins of the games and the strange rules and traditions. For example, the athletes had to participate in the games completely naked. The first reason was because it was a tribute to Zeus, and they wanted to show their physical strength to their god in this way. The second reason was to intimidate other participants. But this isn't the most incredible thing. Did you know that the Greeks sold the sweat of the athletes? The athletes were all covered in olive oil, and after the games, they scraped off their sweat and oil, and it even had its own term called gloios. The gymnasium workers had to collect the sweat of the athletes, and it was eventually sold for medical purposes. In discussions about the ancient Egyptians and their respect for animals, the Greek historian Herodotus recounted a peculiar custom. Upon the death of a cat, every member of the household ritual shaved their eyebrows as a visible sign of respect. However, this gesture went beyond mere affection for pets. It emphasized the deep significance animals held within the Egyptian worldview. In their cosmology, animals held a sacred status, closely intertwined with both daily life and religious rituals. Many animals were associated with specific deities, sharing common traits and divine attributes. Cats in particular held a revered position in Egyptian society. From statues to tomb paintings, images of cats were abundant, attesting to their protective and sacred nature. There are even legends of royal cats adorned with lavish gold jewelry demonstrating their esteemed status. So great was the reverence for these beings that extensive mummification rituals were performed upon their death, often accompanied by their human counterparts in burial to ensure companionship in the afterlife. Gothic architecture is something that survived from the Middle Ages that we can still see today. Needless to say, this style is quite amazing, and has very interesting and even mysterious history behind it. Medieval gargoyles are essential elements of this architecture, and you could have probably seen one at one point. In Gothic architecture, they were built and used to drain rainwater from the roof, but they also have a deeper meaning. In French, gargoyles are called gargouilles. This word can also be translated as throat or esophagus. That makes sense because water runs out of their mouths. Legend has it that Saint Roman once saved a town from a dangerous dragon with the same name. It was believed that this dragon had connections to hell. Partly for this reason, these gargoyles were built on the medieval churches so that people would be reminded of the terrible torments of hell. In Egyptian mythology, baboons were closely associated with Thoth, the god of wisdom, who symbolized intellectual prowess and divine insight. Beyond their mythical significance, baboons were integrated into daily life, as evidenced by their domestication as pets and the discovery of mummified remains by archaeologists. Egyptian art depicts vivid images of baboons engaging in various human activities, from dancing and playing musical instruments and making beverages like wine and beer. Remarkably, hieroglyphs and artworks show baboons being used by authorities as a means of law enforcement, akin to modern police dogs. Egyptian artworks also depict authorities unleashing a baboon on a thief in the market, while the criminal begs for mercy as the baboon sinks its teeth into his leg. During the Old Kingdom, Hamadryas baboons and olive baboons were native to the southern regions of Upper Egypt. However, by the Middle Kingdom period, it's speculated that these native populations had declined or disappeared entirely. Records from the New Kingdom suggest that baboons were imported from southern regions, possibly from Nubia or the distant land of Punt. Notably, during the pre-dynastic period, a deity known as Baba or Babi was worshipped, often depicted as the bull of the baboons. It's no secret that ancient people, even people in the Middle Ages, used absolutely strange things for cosmetic procedures. In Egypt, for example, people used harmful chemicals to make dark eye makeup. Arsenic was a common thing in the daily ritual of women in Victorian England. But what about Greece? There, everything was not so dangerous, but they used the dung of the crocodile as a skin cream, and people also liked to take a bath with it. The women of ancient Greece believed that the crocodile dung would make their faces and skin paler. Rubbing dried crocodile feces into the face was a common treatment there. Moreover, they believed that the cream, which was actually a mixture of manure and mud, had the anti-aging effect. But if they wanted deep relaxation, they simply take a full bath of crocodile manure mixed with mud and just relaxed. Tutankhamun was an ancient Egyptian pharaoh who ruled during the 18th dynasty, from approximately 1332 to 1323 BCE. He ascended the throne at a young age, likely around 9 or 10 years old, and ruled for a relatively short period before his death. Tutankhamun is especially famous for the discovery of his nearly intact tomb in the Valley of the Kings. At Tutankhamun's funeral, about 35 pairs of shoes and over a dozen loose pieces were discovered. Most common were sewn sandals, made of strips of papyrus sewn together, likely intended for daily wear. The young king had luxurious golden sandals, never worn during his lifetime, but made for eternity, which were displayed in his golden coffin. All of these would have value solely because they were the shoes of the boy king. But what raised eyebrows in disbelief was this, his leather sandals, carved in mosaic style with images of Syrian and Nubian prisoners on the soles. This allowed Tutankhamun to figuratively step on Egypt's enemies with every step he took. His staff also featured images of more enemies, reinforcing the symbolic dominance of the pharaoh over his foes. The Middle Ages were a difficult time for humanity. Today, for example, divorce seems to be a fairly normal thing to do. For all we know that it's better to separate from each other than try to continue together if you're constantly quarreling. In the Middle Ages, however, people had the opportunity to use physical violence to fight for their rights in marriage. Literally, that is. For example, in 1467, there was a book that illustrated that two married people were allowed to fight each other in court. There were even some rules about how to fight, and what they could or could not do. Interestingly, there were some concessions for women. because men clearly have a physical advantage. But the two had to fight to the end, and if the woman won, the man was executed. If the man won, the woman was buried alive. What a bizarre way to separate, don't you think? In ancient Egypt, there was a period during which it was believed that men also menstruated. What happened is that, around the puberty of boys, blood was found in their urine. The presence of blood in the urine was interpreted differently by some communities in Egypt, often attributed to a phenomenon called male menstruation. However, this event is now understood as a symptom of schistosomiasis, a chronic disease caused by a parasitic infection, particularly Schistosoma hematobium. Schistosomiasis is common in areas where people come into contact with fresh water contaminated with schistosomes, prevalent in regions with wet environments such as rice fields. Especially those involved in activities such as agriculture or fishing often coincided with the onset of puberty, with the appearance of blood in their urine due to the parasitic infection. In such communities, this manifestation was once considered a normal part of male adolescence, akin to a rite of passage. The disease itself, commonly known as snail fever due to transmission via freshwater snails, was identified by the German physician Theodor Bilharz and is also called bilharzia. Have you ever wondered what people had to do before toilet paper was invented? What did they actually wipe themselves with? All over the world, people did it in very different ways, but in ancient Greece, they really did it in a completely unique way. Hygiene in ancient Greece was more than unique, and so they used stones instead of toilet paper. The stones were called pissoi, but they also used ostraka, fragments of ceramic for wiping. If you study the ancient art of Greece, you may have seen a few images of people wiping with stones. They even had a saying, 3 stones are enough to wipe one's behind, which they used to emphasize that they were frugal. What's really funny is that the ancient Greeks certainly had a sense of humor, because they wrote the names of the people they hated on their stones. This is like putting the name of your enemy on your toilet paper. For over 2,000 years, people have sought comfort and support for their heads while sleeping. But before there were feather-filled pillows, ancient civilizations such as the Egyptians relied on stone headrests to elevate their heads during rest. Various materials, including marble, ivory, ceramic, stone, wood, and even glass, were used to make these headrests, which have been excavated in Egyptian tombs. While they offered practical benefits such as keeping insects and pests at bay and allowing airflow to cool the sleeper, these stone pillows also had spiritual significance in ancient Egyptian culture. In Egyptian belief systems, the head was considered the location of spiritual life and needed protection. Therefore, stone headrests often had engravings of protective deities such as Beis, whose menacing face was believed to ward off evil spirits. A global pandemic is nothing new to mankind, but the Black Plague that took place from 1347 to 1352 is considered one of the worst in history. This highly contagious disease was so terrible and relentless that about a third of the population of Europe died. Hundreds of cities were destroyed by it at that time. The plague was spread by rats, which carried fleas on their bodies. These fleas were deadly to humans, but not only the fleas of the Black Plague were a problem in medieval Europe. There were also guinea worms, which literally ate people alive. The painting of a French saint with a worm coming out of his leg is proof. The painting of a French saint with a worm coming out of his leg is proof that people did not only suffer from the plague then. However, guinea worms were not deadly to humans, but they were very, very painful. In ancient Egypt, the annual flooding of the Nile in August was a crucial event on which the prosperity of the civilization depended. Along with the rising waters, the presence of crocodiles in the Nile increased. As a result, crocodiles had a complex and significant role in Egyptian mythology. Revered as manifestations of Sobek, the god of water, crocodiles were an integral part of rituals aimed at appeasing this deity. Sobek, often depicted with the body of a man and the head of a crocodile, was believed to protect the people. Such dangers associated with the Nile, including floods, waterborne diseases, and attacks by dangerous creatures such as venomous snakes, crocodiles, and hippos. In 2019, a tomb was found containing 10 mummified crocodiles. The mummified remains, belonging to both West African and Nile crocodiles, indicate the veneration and rituals surrounding these animals. The crocodiles, ranging from 6 to 10 feet meters in length, were likely captured with nets and then subjected to various methods, including drowning, suffocation, or exposure to the heat of the sun, to ensure they were deceased before being buried in the tomb. What's a declaration of love to you? Probably support, attention, flowers, and hugs. But in ancient Greece, they had another method of saying I love you, namely throwing apples. In ancient Greece, apples were a sacred fruit for Aphrodite, the goddess of fertility and love. And if you wanted to show someone your love, it was more than enough to throw an apple at that person. So basically, throwing an apple at someone means that you love them. But there's another thing. If that person actually catches the apple, it's a sign that they have accepted your love. Archaeological evidence vividly illustrates the popularity of board games in ancient civilizations, particularly in Egypt. Scenes depicting players engaging in these games adorn tomb walls and papyri. The most popular ancient Egyptian games were Mehen, Senet, 20 Squares, and Dogs and Jackals. Mehen, meaning the coiled one, originated during the Egyptian pre-dynastic period and the Old Kingdom, featuring a board adorned with a coiled snake representing a protective deity enveloping the sun god Re during his nightly journey. Inscriptions and religious texts from the Old Kingdom, such as the pyramid texts, suggest the belief that passage through the Mehen board game symbolized the acquisition of the afterlife, with successful players metaphorically joining Re on his celestial journey by reaching the center of the spiral. Queen Nefertari herself is depicted playing Senet in the wall art of her tomb, while King Tutankhamun was buried with no fewer than 5 sets of gaming boards. We all know that throughout history, women had to fight hard for their rights, and that life for a woman was very hard, especially in the Middle Ages. They had to work in the fields, take care of the children, and also had to obey their husbands. Surprisingly, some women were able to get an education, and some worked as a maid to a count, nobleman, or even a king. But in general, the situation was not so bright for most women. For example, they didn't really have a choice when it came to getting married. Most of the time, they didn't even know who their husband-to-be was before the marriage. Some women could even be engaged at the age of 12 years old. So many marriages were far from being based on love. Fortunately, some of them were based on friendship. From the earliest periods of Egyptian history, individuals adorned themselves with an abundance of cosmetics, including eyeliner, eyeshadow, lipstick, and rouge. However, makeup served not only aesthetic purposes, but also practical, ritual, and symbolic meanings. Luxurious calcite pots housed a range of makeup, ointments, and perfumes, while containers for eye paint and oils were carefully crafted from glass, gold, or semi-precious stones. Siltstone palettes, used for grinding coal and eyeshadow, were intricately carved into shapes depicting animals, goddesses, or young women. These symbols of rebirth and regeneration lent a deeper significance to the application of cosmetics, believed to bestow special powers to the wearer by harnessing the essence of the depicted beings. Even in death, personal appearance retained utmost importance for Egyptian identity. Burial sites dating back to pre-dynastic times reveal the customary inclusion of everyday items such as combs, fragrant ointments, jewelry, and cosmetics in the tombs of individuals from all demographics. Notably, many of these tombs have been excavated with cosmetics still intact. The next one is really strange to realize, but the ancient Greeks were aware of zombies. You probably thought that zombies came from American pop and movie culture, but this is apparently not the case. The ancient Greeks struggled with necromancy. This is when you communicate with the dead, and necrophobia, when you're afraid of the dead. Interestingly enough, necrophobia was very common in ancient Greece, and several scientists have proven it. The Greeks were especially afraid that zombies would wake up from their graves and walk through the streets randomly stalking people. It was a normal practice for the people to bury the bodies and cover them with as many stones as possible, because they were afraid of the possibility that the dead body might escape. So it seems that they were really afraid of these zombies. In the extensive Egyptian pantheon, it's no surprise that more than 2,000 deities were influential. While some of these gods and goddesses are well known, such as Isis, Osiris, Horus, Amun, Ra, Hathor, Bastet, Thoth, Anubis, and Ptah, many others remain unknown. Each deity played a significant role in the lives of their worshippers, often limited to a specific location. For example, women turned to Isis, the Divine Mother, seeking her blessings and assistance. Although the gods of ancient Egypt had unique appearances, they shared common characteristics. Typically, the gods appeared in human form or as humans with animal heads. Daily rituals focused on caring for the gods took place in local temples, usually under the supervision of the king or a high priest. Festivals provided the opportunity for the entire community to worship the gods and goddesses of ancient Egypt together. Images of the gods were paraded through the city on barks, small boats specially designed for this purpose. In private households, individuals found various ways to serve the gods. Many homes had personal altars where families worshipped their own household gods, seeking protection for their dwellings and inhabitants. Offerings to the deceased were a crucial aspect of worship. Family members honored the god Osiris by offering bread, beer, cattle, birds, and clothing. The modern soccer we know today has nothing to do with the kind of soccer people played in the Middle Ages. The difference is quite huge, starting with the number of players. In modern soccer, there's 11 players from each team on the field. But how many players do you think were on the medieval soccer team? Don't be alarmed, as there could have been as many as 300 to 500 soccer players on each individual team. In addition, soccer was extremely harsh and quite brutal. It was much more like American football. Medieval soccer was very chaotic and incredibly wild, as players were allowed to hit and kick each other, and even wrestle with each other. So there were also no penalties, cards, or even fines for aggressive behavior. The ancient Egyptians offered honey to their deities as a sacrifice, and used it for embalming the dead. The antibacterial properties of honey were beneficial for healing infected wounds, and it was also utilized as a topical ointment. Egyptians considered bees sacred, believing that their sun god Re created them from his tears. Bees and honey were cherished by the pharaohs, and pots of honey were even buried with deceased royalty. Honey was incorporated into remedies for various ailments, as it was mentioned 500 times in 900 ancient Egyptian prescriptions. It wasn't just used for religious and medicinal purposes, but also had practical applications, depending on your definition of practical. Pepitu Neferkar, an Egyptian pharaoh of the Old Kingdom, insisted that his slaves smear themselves with honey to keep flies away. Egyptian medicine was, to say the least, unusual. When it comes to drinking wine and partying, the Greeks have no equal, except for the Vikings. But you may be surprised to learn that the ancient Greeks were not really wine experts, even though they always had fantastic vineyards. Like no other, the Greeks invented their own way of drinking wine. They diluted it with water, 1 part wine to 3 parts water. You may think this was disrespectful to wine, but the way they drank it prevented excessive alcoholism, which was very common among other peoples and cultures. Alcoholism was also not welcomed in various myths and ancient Greek stories, and now we understand why. So the ancient Greeks never really got drunk. In the current era, giraffes are primarily found in sub-Saharan Africa, not in the Nile Valley. However, it is important to emphasize that the Sahara Desert was not always as dry as it is today. In the past, it supported a diverse range of vegetation and animals, including giraffes. Let's envision ancient Egypt again. As the climate gradually changed and the desert became inhospitable, both animals and humans were pushed southward into the Nile Valley. This concentration of people in the valley, along with the shift from a nomadic pastoral lifestyle to settled agriculture, played a crucial role in initiating the development of Egyptian civilization. During the period from about 5000 BCE to 3250 BCE, prehistoric Egyptians would have coexisted with giraffes, possibly even large herds of them. They were often depicted in wall paintings and were seen as tributes presented to Tutankhamun in the 14th century BCE. Giraffes were also represented in the rock art of the African Bushmen and the Hottentots. In antiquity, giraffes were highly valued for various reasons. Their thick and durable skin was suitable for a range of purposes, including making clothing, shoes, bags, belts, hats, and even blankets for drums. As for their tails, these were often used as fly swatters. If it worked for the giraffe itself, then it also did for the people. What first comes to mind when you think of cemeteries? Probably not very pleasant things. Plus, the gravestones can create an eerie atmosphere. But in the Middle Ages, cemeteries were social gathering places. People back then thought it was a fine time to spend together there. The reason for this is because people in the Middle Ages did not hide death. For example, there were no closed cemeteries, and people could walk around freely, while enjoying some food, a drink, or even gambling. People in the Middle Ages believed that death was not something bad. In fact, the church preached that life in heaven was much better. Almost all people believed the words of the church then, because it had a huge influence in the Middle Ages. Like the rulers of many societies, Egyptian pharaohs possessed a wide array of lavish garments in their royal wardrobes. Among these royal ensembles was one of the most intriguing elements, the peculiar false metal beards adorning their chins. Despite their carefully shaved faces, pharaohs chose to wear these artificial beards instead of growing their own. But why opt for these false beards when they could grow real ones? Well, pharaohs embraced the tradition of wearing false beards upon assuming power. These false beards symbolized their connection to the divine realm and reinforced their role as intermediaries between the mortal and the divine. During the reign of Hatshepsut, a remarkable period in ancient Egypt, when women assuming positions of authority was highly unusual, she achieved the same level of success as the male pharaohs before her. This was not an attempt to disguise herself, but rather a powerful statement to indicate that she, despite being a woman, deserved the same respect and authority as any male pharaoh. The ancient world had many tortures that are hard to imagine in our modern day. If you haven't heard about the copper bull, you probably don't want to know what it is. If you haven't heard about the copper bull, you probably don't want to know it's the worst torture machine in history. This cruel thing was made entirely of copper, and it was invented in ancient Greece. This may sound insane, but it was made to roast people alive. According to legend, this machine was created by a sculptor named Paralis, who wanted to portray Phalaris, the cruel tyrant who ruled the Greek coastal colony of Acragas. The statue looked exactly like a bull, but it was not just any bull. It had a space inside that could fit a living person. If someone didn't do what the tyrant wanted, the person would be put in this bull and roasted alive. One of the most renowned beauty secrets of ancient Egypt is the use of milk baths as skincare treatments. It is even believed that Cleopatra indulged herself in baths of sour donkey milk, acknowledging the exfoliating and rejuvenating properties of lactic acid. Another, perhaps less eccentric beauty secret involved the use of Dead Sea salt in baths to remove impurities. When milk sours, natural lactose is converted into lactic acid by bacteria. When alpha hydroxy acids like lactic acid are applied to the skin, they help in exfoliating the surface layer, revealing underneath a fresh, smoother, and blemish-free skin. Interestingly, Cleopatra's beauty regimen extended beyond just milk baths. She is said to have also used powder made from crocodile excrement to enhance her complexion. Perhaps this experimentation with unique ingredients fueled Cleopatra's interest in perfumes. In her perfume factory, Cleopatra would mix herbs, flower petals, leaves, or seeds with hot vegetable oils sourced from pressed olives. This mixture would soak for a week before being pressed through a cloth bag, resulting in the extraction of perfumed oil. Ancient depictions of Cleopatra often showcase her enchanting eyes. These were accentuated with green copper malachite and black lead sulfide. These cosmetic choices not only contributed to her appearance, but also served the practical purpose of repelling flies. They used human fat for muscle pain, and they also attended executions to get a cup of fresh blood. It may be very hard to believe now, but quite a lot of people in the Middle Ages, even scientists, believed that there were little people in the seed of men, and that these little people walked around in them. Of course, even the people were eager to know the origin of a new baby. That's why many scientists sometimes had crazy theories. The birth of a baby was a great mystery to them. They just couldn't figure out exactly how they were formed. So one of the theories suggested that there were little walking human beings running around inside the sperm cell, which after fertilization begins to grow in the woman's womb. Nowadays, we know better. Babies are in fact delivered by a stork, right? In ancient Egypt, pharaohs were typically mummified and laid to rest in elaborate tombs upon their demise. During the early dynasties, sacred bulls also had their own burial grounds at Saqqara. Baboons, cats, birds, and crocodiles, which also held significant religious importance, were sometimes mummified, especially in later dynasties. The Egyptians believed that the mummified body served as the eternal home for the soul or spirit. The mummification process involved several steps. Initially, the internal organs, including the lungs, stomach, liver, and intestines, were carefully removed and individually embalmed. These organs were placed in canopic jars, often adorned with one of the 4 animal-headed sons of the god Horus, each son guarding over a specific organ. Preserving these organs was crucial as they would enable the deceased to breathe and eat in the afterlife. Around 1000 BC, the mummification process changed. The internal organs were usually intricately reinserted into the body, tied to it, or stored in boxes, rather than placed in pots. The heart, representing the center of knowledge and emotions, was typically left intact in the body, while the brain was often discarded. In ancient Greece, if you had your eyebrows joined in the middle, which is called a unibrow, it was considered pure beauty. But how did that come about? We can thank the philosopher Pythagoras for that. Pythagoras was the one who developed the golden ratio. The golden ratio is a geometric formula that shows the balance and symmetry in everything. This formula can be used in many things, from photographs to the beauty industry, and so it's believed that symmetrical faces are the most beautiful. Therefore, in ancient Greece, the unibrow was seen as a sign of beauty, as it made the face more symmetrical. So women were also really obsessed with the trend, and the woman who didn't have a unibrow tried to create one with charcoal. Tattoos are a form of art deeply rooted in various cultures throughout history. Evidence of tattooing tools, small bronze instruments, was discovered in the city of Ghurab in northern Egypt, dating back to around 1450 BC. However, the art of tattooing in ancient Egypt goes even further back and was already practiced during the Middle Kingdom. In ancient Egypt, tattoos were mainly worn by women, possibly for similar reasons as men. Tattooing of women served a therapeutic role and acted as a permanent form of amulet or protective charm. The origins of tattoos date back to 6000 to 3150 BC, based on suggestive evidence indicating that priestesses of the goddess Hathor may have marked themselves during that time. Other women adorn themselves with tattoos as symbolic protection during pregnancy and childbirth. Now it's time to talk about medieval fashion. Did you know that people back then were obsessed with long, pointy shoes? If you were a man, a proud owner of such shoes, you were considered the most stylish man ever. Even though it seems very funny to us, for medieval people, it was a very important and serious thing. The shoes had a special name, crockaus, but fashion followers of the English Middle Ages, unfortunately, could not walk long to show off these shoes with points of 12 inches, because King Edward decided that such shoes were offensive. A law was passed by him forbidding people to wear these shoes. The earliest pyramids were built between 26660 and 2500 BC. By this time, the Egyptians had already developed considerable expertise in the construction of drainage systems, which was particularly significant due to the role of water in their priestly rituals and purifications. And burial practices. According to ancient Egyptian beliefs, death was considered a transition from one state of existence to another. Just as the living required food, clothing, and other necessities, it was believed that the deceased would also need similar provisions in the afterlife. During excavations of the funerary temple of King Sahur, niches in the walls and remnants of stone basins were discovered. These basins were equipped with metal fittings and served as toilets. The outlet of the basin was sealed with a load stepper attached to a chain and a bronze ring. The basin would then drain through a copper pipe into a channel below. Originally, copper basins were exclusively reserved for use by the pharaohs. The homes of the affluent in ancient Egypt were spacious and well-designed, with various rooms, such as bedrooms, servant quarters, halls, dining rooms, and bathrooms. However, the concept of a bathroom in ancient Egyptian houses typically consisted of a small enclosed room with a square limestone slab in the corner. We know that talented or people who are obsessed with their projects can sometimes do unusual or weird things. But did you know that ancient Greece was known for its unusual people like Pythagoras, Socrates, and Hippocrates? And did you know that Hippocrates was best known as the father of medicine, and that he ate earwax? In fact, he did this for medical purposes. If he wanted to know what caused a particular illness, he was willing to do whatever it took to find out what was wrong with that person. To make a diagnosis, he needed several analyses, starting with urine, vomit, or sweat, and ending with earwax. Surprisingly, he was even willing to taste the earwax to find out what was wrong with the patient. According to Hippocrates, better earwax was a sign of good health. But if the patient's earwax was sweet, it means he was sick. Animals held a deep significance in both royal and ordinary life in Egypt. They served diverse roles, acting as deities, pets, symbols of fertility, objects of fear, protection, and good fortune. Large cats, such as cheetahs and lions, were kept as exotic pets and became symbols of royalty. These majestic felines symbolized strength and authority. On the other hand, animals that instilled fear in ancient Egyptians, such as crocodiles and hippos, were revered and worshipped. Cats have been depicted in tomb scenes dating back to the Old Kingdom over 4,600 years ago. Across the Nile, a cemetery for dogs was discovered in Saqqara, the necropolis for the ancient Egyptian capital, Memphis. Here, over 1.75 million obese remains were found, indicating their veneration. Interactions between humans and monkeys were also documented in wall paintings from the Old Kingdom, depicting monkeys performing human activities and even being kept on leashes. Wealthier individuals sometimes kept young monkeys as pets in their households. If you think you've heard about the most bizarre things from the Middle Ages by now, you're wrong. In medicine, there were also some truly bizarre and incredible things that we definitely need to talk about. People in medieval Europe believed, in fact, that the blood of a gladiator could cure epilepsy. It was reported by several medical authors of the time. Moreover, they claimed that it was not only their blood. The medieval medics also reported that the liver of the gladiator could be a cure for people who specifically suffered from epilepsy. They thought this because it was firmly believed that the energy of a strong young man was truly healing. Drinking their blood and eating their liver would transmit that energy. What do you think of the Middle Ages, and would you like to have lived in this period? Let us know in the comments. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more videos we've made, click one on the screen or take a look at the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.